4,000 warships were closing in, and the computer had just informed them their odds of survival were exactly 0, unless, of course, they did the one thing their enemies couldn't imagine. A crimson alert bathed the command deck of Aegis Prime in flashing light, painting every steel panel and control console in shades of blood. Sirens screamed through the corridors, a mechanical wail that made the air itself feel tight. Outside the panoramic viewport, Venus rolled slowly below a rolling sea of gold clouds lit by the distant sun, while above the cold void shimmered with the faint glint of an approaching storm. Commodore Kane stood at the center of the deck, hands resting casually on the railing, as if the largest fleet in recorded history wasn't bearing down on his station. Tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver in his dark hair and the hard eyes of a man who'd seen too many wars, Kane wore a faint, crooked smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong in moments like this, half defiance, half provocation, distance. His voice was calm, almost lazy, as if asking about the weather. Lieutenant Dorian Holt's fingers flew over his console, the holographic display rippling with data. 0.3 astronomical units. Velocity, increasing. ETA to the firing range, 26 minutes. His voice was steady, but Kane caught the tightness in it, the kind you only get when your body knows it might not see another dawn. The tactical display zoomed out, revealing a swarm of red icons blooming across the void. 4,000 ships, battleships bristling with rail batteries, cruisers that could glass a moon in minutes, carrier formations with fighter clouds like drifting schools of predators. Above them all, the flagship of the Void Alliance, an angular fortress of metal and death cut through the black like a moving continent. Holt looked up, his face pale in the emergency light. "Sir, that's the largest concentration of firepower ever assembled in one system." Kane didn't look away from the viewport. "They like to make an entrance." His tone was dry, but there was an undercurrent there, something like quiet rage wrapped in ice. The station's cut in voice, neutral and absolute. Probability of successful resistance, 0.0%. Recommendation, immediate surrender. Someone on the bridge swore under their breath. Holt clenched his jaw. Kane just exhaled slowly, as if the eye had told him the sky was blue-dotted. Was the year 9281, Galactic Standard, and humanity had survived long enough to crawl out of its cradle. 6 decades of faster-than-light travel. Half that time was spent pretending to be harmless. A footnote in the politics of the galaxy. The Void Alliance, the oldest, cruelest collection of empires in the Orion Arm, had decided that was long enough. They'd come for Terra now, the same way they'd come for 100 other worlds before. And like every time before, they expected the prey to roll over and die. Message from the lead Alliance vessel. Holt reported. "It's Admiral Vorthkal. He's demanding a direct link." Kane's smile widened a fraction. "Of course he is." The bridge crew moved with mechanical efficiency, but there was no disguising the tension in their faces. Every ping of the sensors, every pulse of the red light seemed louder, sharper. Somewhere deep inside the station, a power conduit hummed, low and steady, like a sleeping predator. A communications officer called out, "Channel open." Kane straightened slightly, clasping his hands behind his back as the main display flickered. The face that appeared was all sharp ridges and shadowed eyes, framed by ceremonial armor that looked like it could stop a meteor. Vorthkal's voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of someone who had ordered the deaths of billions and slept well afterward. "Commodore Kane of Terra, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender your station and your world. You will be spared, for now." The crew bristled at the contempt in the alien's tone. Kane's smile didn't fade. "Admiral," he said lightly, "I'd offer you tea, but you've brought too many friends. Space is limited." Vorthkal's eyes narrowed. "Do not waste my time. You have 20 minutes to comply." The channel cut. The bridge fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint vibration in the deck plates. Holt glanced over. "Sir, what's the plan?" Kane turned, his gaze sweeping the crew, lingering on each face. "The plan," he said slowly, "to make sure they remember this day for the rest of their very short lives." From the far side of the deck, Dr. Sera Lin stepped into the light, her lab coat fluttering slightly in the artificial breeze of the ventilation. She said nothing, but the look she exchanged with Kane was loaded, part warning, part anticipation. Somewhere below their feet, buried deep in the armored spine of Aegis Prime, the pulse cannon waited. The hum in the deck grew louder, more insistent. Lights along the starboard wall flickered, then steadied. Holt's eyes widened at his console. "Sir, they've crossed the outer marker." Kane's smile returned, sharper now, carrying something dangerous with it. He turned back to the viewport, where the distant pinpricks of the enemy fleet were swelling larger with each passing second. "They've entered range," Holt confirmed. Kane's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but every person on the bridge heard it. "They're in our sights." The comlink flared to life again before anyone could move. Fourth Call's face filling the main display with jagged impatience. Behind him, Kane could make out the blurred silhouettes of officers moving with predatory calm, their armor gleaming under cold blue light. "Commodore Kane," Call said, his voice measured but laced with threat, "I see you've chosen not to comply immediately. That is unfortunate. You have 19 minutes remaining." The timer began counting down. In the upper corner of the display, each red digit shifting with an audible tick. It was a small, deliberate cruelty, a constant reminder to the crew that every breath was one closer to annihilation. Kane stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back. "Admiral, it's not that I'm ignoring you. It's just 19 minutes is barely enough time to prepare a proper welcome." The alien's gaze hardened. "I've erased civilizations older than your species without a second thought. If you think your posturing amuses me," Kane cut him off with a faint shake of his head. "No, I think you're very hard to amuse. But you did make one mistake, Admiral." "And what's that?" "You came too close." For a heartbeat, silence reigned on the channel. Then Call's lip curled, a silent snarl, before the link cut without ceremony. The display returned to the tactical feed, the swarm of red icons growing ever denser as the fleet approached. The counter in the corner read 1842. Holt's hands moved quickly over his console. "They're accelerating, sir. Formation is tightening." Kane turned to Sera Lin, who was standing at the engineering station, one hand resting on the rail. "Doctor, status of the..." She cut him off. "Pulse cannon core is charging. 71%. But..." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the crew around them before continuing in a lower voice. "We have a stability problem." Kane's brow furrowed. "Define stability." "The magnetic containment lattice is fluctuating," she said. "It's pulling more power from the planetary siphon than the conduits can handle. At this rate, we can't hold a coherent firing solution without consequences." The deck vibrated faintly, as if something massive deep within the station had shifted. A low hum built in the bones of the structure, accompanied by the faint, high-pitched whine of capacitors approaching their limit. "How bad?" Kane asked. Sera's dark eyes met his. "Best case, misfire. Worst case..." She didn't finish the sentence. Holt glanced between them. "What's the worst case?" Sera's tone was flat. "We vaporize ourselves along with the target." The timer read 1758. Kane exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the viewport. Beyond the curve of Venus, the enemy fleet was now more than a smear of light. It was an armada in perfect formation, like a wall of steel advancing through the void. "We still have options," Holt said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Options are for people with time," Kane replied. "We've got minutes." He stepped toward the main control well, where a holodisplay projected the pulse cannon status. 3 concentric rings showed the progress of the charge cycle, each pulsing with cold blue light. The innermost ring containment stability flickered. Erratically. Sera joined him, her fingers dancing over the projection. "We can compensate for the fluctuation, but it'll require manual calibration at the core. That means sending someone into the chamber while it's hot." "Define hot," Kane said. 800 degrees Kelvin, and fields strong enough to scramble brain tissue in seconds. "No one survives that without a shielded exosuit, and we only have one suit rated for those conditions." The tick of the countdown was louder now, somehow sensing with the pulse of Kane's own heartbeat. 1630. He looked at Holt. "Lieutenant, get me a channel to every deck. I want all personnel at battle stations." Holt nodded and turned to his console. The comm system chirped. "All hands, this is the Commodore. We are weapons hot in less than 15 minutes. This is not a drill." Bridge felt smaller as the minutes bled away. Kane could sense the weight in the air, the way every officer's movements became sharper. more economical, no wasted motion, no wasted breath. On the viewport, the flagship of the Void Alliance loomed larger, its angular hull bristling with weapons arrays. It was a fortress in motion, a predator among predators. The timer reached 15 o'clock. Sera's voice broke the tension. Core at 84%. The container is still unstable. Kane's jaw tightened. How much worse? She didn't flinch. If we fire now, Commodore. She tapped the flickering containment readout. Where instability warnings glowed in angry red. We won't need the Void Alliance to destroy us. The station will detonate from within. The hum in the deck deepened, as though the pulse cannon itself had heard her. The countdown ticked past 14 minutes, each sharp beep from the tactical display slicing through the tense silence like a metronome for impending death. The pulse cannon's charge indicators pulsed in erratic patterns across the holo display too. Rings steady, the containment ring spasming like a heartbeat in cardiac arrest. Lieutenant Holt's hands flew over the engineering console, lines of diagnostic code spilling down his screen. His voice was tight. Magnetic lattice-fueled variance is spiking at 2.7 Hz. If it climbs over 3.2, the field will shear. We need to lock it down now. Dr. Sera Lin didn't even glance up. She was working at a pace that would have broken lesser engineers, her long fingers moving in precise, almost surgical gestures over the projection. I know. I'm rerouting excess flux through the tertiary coils, but the siphon from Earth's core is exceeding the calculated draw. Translation, Kane said, standing behind them. We're overfeeding the beast. Sera finally looked up at him, her dark eyes cold and resolute. The beast doesn't like to be starved, Commodore. If we lower input now, we'll never get the velocity we need to crack the Crownbreaker's armor. The deck shuddered beneath them, a low, resonant vibration that carried up through their boots and into their bones, somewhere deep inside Aegis Prime's armored frame. Titanic capacitors were drinking in raw energy, dim hum a constant, almost physical presence in the air. It made the fillings buzz. It made my hair rise. Holt's eyes darted to the countdown 1317. Doctor, the variance is holding at 2.9, but it's not dropping. I can stabilize it manually, Sera said. From inside the core housing, Holt's head whipped toward her. You'll cook yourself alive in there. We have the HFY exosuit, she replied, as if reading from a checklist. It's rated for this temperature range. And I've run plasma arc calibrations before. I can do this. No, Kane said flatly. Commodore, if I said no, you're the only one who can run final targeting calibrations once this thing is stable. If you fry in there, the rest of us may as well start writing our wills. She stared at him for a long second, lips pressed tight. Then who? Kane didn't answer immediately. The vibration through the deck seemed to intensify, a deep, slow thrum like the breathing of some colossal creature awakening. The lighting dimmed briefly, flickered, then steadied, a sign that the planetary siphon was pushing the station's reactors toward overload. "Ah, go," Holt said suddenly. Both Kane and Sera turned on him. "Absolutely not," they said in unison. "I know them HFY systems," Holt pressed. "And with my EVA experience, you've never worked a live core this size," Sera snapped. "One wrong adjustment, and the containment field collapses instantly. This isn't patching a drive coil, Lieutenant, it's walking into the heart of a star and hoping it doesn't sneeze." The counter hit 12:01. Kane felt the seconds bleeding away like air from a cracked hull. Every passing tick was another meter. The Alliance fleet closed. "Options," he demanded. Sera's jaw clenched. "One of us goes in. Manual calibration. We match the lattice frequency to the siphon draw. Stabilize the field, and pray the core doesn't spike during the process." "And if it spikes?" Kane asked. "Then the pulse cannon becomes a sun," she said simply. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Even the AI remained silent, as if unwilling to interrupt. Kane looked between the two of them. Holt's face was pale but set with stubborn determination. Sera's expression was cool and flinching, but her knuckles were white on the console rail. Finally, Kane straightened. "Lieutenant, suit up. Doctor, you guide him from here." Holt and Kane locked eyes with him, voice like iron. "You keep your head clear. No heroics. You go in, you fix it, and you come back out breathing. That's an order." Holt swallowed, nodded once, and left the bridge at a run. The moment he was gone, Sera exhaled through her nose. He's not ready for this. No one's ready for this, Kane said. But we're out of time. The deck vibrated again, harder this time. The holo display flashed a warning, containment lattice, critical variance. Kane stepped up to the viewport. Out there, the enemy fleet was now visibly maneuvering into attack formation. The Crownbreaker was a dark monolith at the center, its spines bristling with energy. They were coming in confident, certain that Terra's defenders were just one more speed bump on their endless road of conquest. That thought made something cold settle in Kane's chest. Let them think about it. Let them get closer. The comm hissed. Bridge, this is Holt, came the slightly distorted voice over the channel. Entering the core chamber now. Temperature nominal. Beginning manual calibration. Copy, Sera said. Her hands were already moving, feeding him data. Adjusting to by 0.08. Then hold for field readout. A low roar reverberated through the station, plasma currents shifting as the lattice began to sink. Kane kept his gaze locked on the tactical map, watching as the enemy slipped into optimal range. The countdown read 9 o'clock. Holt's breathing was heavy over the comm, the occasional grunt as he worked the massive adjustment levers inside the core. Variance holding steady at 2.9. Sera's tone sharpened. Almost there. Lock ring 3. Now, there was a heavy clunk, and the instability warning on the display flickered from red to amber. The hum in the deck shifted, deepened, and became smoother. Containment stable. Sera confirmed, believe ghosting her voice. Kane turned, scanning the bridge crew. Bring the weapon to full charge. Target the Crownbreaker. The AI's voice was calm, almost eager. Target acquired. Full charge into minutes. Kane let his gaze drift back to the viewport, where the enemy fleet was almost beautiful in its precision. He felt the weight of the moment settle over him, the cold inevitability of what was about to happen. Prepare to fire, he said. The deck of Aegis Prime thrummed like the chest of a predator holding its breath before the strike. The pulse cannon's charge indicators reached 98%. Their cold blue glow bathing the bridge in a ghostly light. The countdown in the corner of the tactical display showed 1:37. Holt's voice crackled over comms from the core chamber. Containment is holding. She's running hotter than projections, but she'll hold on. Dr. Sera Lin stood at her station, eyes locked on the stabilizer readouts. Joe tight. The magnetic lattice is solid. Commodore, we're green across the board. Kane's gaze stayed fixed on the viewport. The Crownbreaker dominated the center of the enemy formation, an obsidian fortress bristling with rail batteries, energy lances, and layered armor that had shrugged off every weapon the galaxy could throw at it. Until now, the AI's voice carried over the bridge, calm and precise. Full charge in 30 seconds. Recommend crew secure shot positions. Around Kane, the bridge officers moved into harnesses, strapping in with the quiet discipline of soldiers who understood exactly how violent the next moment would be. Even so, a hush settled over the deck, thick enough to feel from Holt's perspective in the core chamber. It was like standing in the heart of a living star. The massive concentric rings of the pulse cannon spun slowly around him, each glowing with an impossible radiance, arcs of ionized plasma dancing between them in steady, lethal rhythm. The suit's shielding kept the worst of it at bay, but the field still made his teeth ache. 0:10. Single quotes S voice, low and deliberate. Target locked. Crownbreaker at optimal range. Kane exhaled once. Slow, steady. Fire. The pulse cannon did not roar, it howled. From the outside, a beam of white-blue plasma erupted from the station's forward array with such intensity it seemed to tear the darkness apart. Space around the beam warped, the edges of reality shimmering as relativistic energy tore through it. The flash lit the bridge like a sun-going nova. Shadows stretching and snapping in jagged fragments across every surface. On the bridge, the vibration was violent, straps strained, consoles rattled, and a deep, resonant boom echoed through the structure. The sound wasn't just heard. It pressed against bones, crawled along nerves. From the enemy flagship, the Crownbreaker's crew saw only a distant flare, then the flare grew, impossibly fast, until it filled their forward screens. There was no time for evasive maneuvers. No time for shields to cycle up. The beam struck the bow with surgical precision, and in less than a heartbeat, the forward third of the vessel simply ceased to exist. Shockwaves rippled through the rest of the hull, armor vaporizing in a chain. Reaction as the superheated plasma tunneled deep into the ship's core. The Crownbreaker's reactors overloaded, their detonation blooming into a blinding sphere that swallowed what was left of the ship. From the bridge of Aegis Prime, Kane watched as the obsidian monolith fractured into nothing but a cloud of incandescent debris. Even from this distance, the explosion was so bright the viewport's filters dimmed to prevent blindness. Silence followed. The tactical display blinked, one icon gone from the enemy formation. A very large, very important icon. On the remaining Void Alliance ships, chaos erupted. Admirals shouted over comms, formations wavered, smaller vessels scrambled to adjust positions as if bracing for an attack they no longer knew how to counter. In the gunnery pits of an Alliance cruiser, a young ensign's voice cracked as he whispered, "They killed the Crownbreaker. In one shot." On the deck of Aegis Prime, Holt's voice came over the comm, breathless, "Containment's holding. We can fire again. God help me, Commodore. We can do it again." Kane allowed himself the smallest smile. "Oh, they'll believe it." The AI reported, "Enemy fleet is altering trajectory. Some units are pulling back. Others are maintaining distance but not advancing." Sera glanced at Kane. "They're trying to figure out if that was a fluke." "Good," Kane said. "Let them wonder. Fear is the best armor we've got right now." On the far edge of the tactical screen, and no movement registered single contacts emerging from the shadow of a moon fragment near the Crownbreaker's last position. At first they looked like debris, but their vector was deliberate, cutting toward Aegis Prime. At speed, and known contacts, Holt called from the core chamber. "There, yes, too small for warships, too big for fighters." The comms station lit up. "Incoming transmission," the officer reported. "Not from the Alliance fleet. Origin point, unknown." The main screen flickered, static rippling across its surface before resolving into the image of a figure cloaked in shadow. The voice that came through was low, measured, and chillingly calm. "Commodore Kane," it said, "you've just made the galaxy a much louder place. And there are those of us who have been waiting for that sound." The shadowed figure leaned forward, and the static cleared just enough to reveal a face angular, scarred, with eyes like shards of obsidian. "This is Envoy HFY," the voice said, rich with a confidence that made the hair on the back of Kane's neck stir. "Representative of the Free Systems Alliance, survivor of the Tuaran Purge. I speak for those your enemies thought were dead." Kane didn't answer immediately. Behind him, Sera Lin's posture shifted, as if she recognized the name. Holt's voice came from the core chamber, low and wary. "Free Systems Alliance. I thought they were just a myth." "They were," Vel said, as if hearing him. "Until now. Your strike on the Crownbreaker is the signal we've been waiting for. The time for hiding is over." The tactical map rippled as dozens of new icons bloomed across it far beyond the Sol system. Kane frowned, leaning closer. The signatures were scattered across the Orion Arm, outer colonies, mining belts, forgotten trade routes. Vel's voice was steady, almost serene. 18 years of preparation, salvaged knowledge from every world the Void Alliance tried to erase. "We've built what you built, Commodore, and we've been patient." The first strike came in silence, a distant systems comms feed patching into Aegis Prime's tactical overlay. A pulse cannon sleek, leaner than Terra's, unleashed a beam that shredded the capital ship of the Varan Dominion above their homeworld. The impact was so bright the feed's filters failed for a second, drowning the screen in white dot. Another icon blinked on. Then another. From the asteroid citadels of the Calith refugees, from the deep space stations of the Koran exiles, from moons no one had charted in centuries, pulse cannons roared to life. Sera whispered, "They're all firing." On every channel, panic rippled through the Void Alliance fleet. Commands overlapped, voices cracked with disbelief. Kane watched as the Crownbreaker's destruction was replayed again and again on enemy tactical screens. Each replay now joined by fresh footage from other systems, other flagships dying in the same blindy Eng flashed in the heart of the Alliance formation. Admiral Vorthkal stood rigid on his command deck. The bridge around him was a storm officer's barking positional data, alarms wailing, holograms flickering with incoming casualty reports from half a galaxy away. His aides were pale, antennae twitching in shock. Kal's voice was low but venomous. "Identify all sources." How are they? How are they everywhere?" No one answered. Reports kept streaming in loss of the Varan Dominion Corps fleet, the neutralization of the Calvoran shipyards, the destruction of an entire supply armada. At the Hacker Rift, one of his tactical officers looked up, voice shaking. "Sir, these weapons, they're identical to the one that destroyed the Crownbreaker." "That's impossible," Call snapped. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. The impossible had just happened. On Aegis Prime, Kane listened to Vel's voice with the focus of a man reading the wind before a storm. "This is not just about defending Terra," Vel continued. "Every Alliance world that ever suffered under their flag is rising. We've given them the means to make sure they're never prey again." The tactical display zoomed out to a galactic scale. Dozens, no, hundreds of red enemy icons were blinking out in real time, replaced by the neutral gray of ships and stations reduced to dust. Entire fleets were scattering. Supply lines were fracturing. On the bridge of the Alliance flagship, Call gripped the railing, his claws biting into the metal. His mind was a whirl of half-formed strategies, all dissolving in the flood of bad data. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was the making of the order he had spent his career maintaining. One of his captain's voices cut through the chaos on the fleet channel. "Admiral, half the sectors are in revolt. We're receiving distress calls from our own core worlds." Call shut his eyes briefly, then opened them with a glare that could have cut glass. "Get me a direct channel to the human Commodore." Moments later, Kane's main screen filled with Call's image, no longer the face of a man certain of victory, but the taut expression of a predator who'd just discovered the forest was full of hunters. The two men stared at each other across the light years. Around Kane, the bridge was still alive with reports of pulse cannons firing in distant systems, the sound of 1,000 chains breaking echoing through the void. Call's voice was controlled, but every word cost him. "Commodore Kane, name your terms for surrender." The bridge of Aegis Prime was so quiet Kane could hear the faint hum of the pulse cannon's cooling systems beneath the deck. On the main display, Admiral Vorth Call's image loomed, his jaw tight, eyes like obsidian chips burning with reluctant focus. "Name your terms," Call repeated, his voice stripped of the arrogance it carried not an hour ago. Around him, Kane could see the flicker of holographic data feeds, enemy fleets breaking formation, sectors reporting insurrection, icons blinking red and vanishing. Kane didn't hesitate. "First, your fleet leaves Sol immediately. No delays, no rear guard. You cross the heliopause in 6 hours or less." Call's mouth twitched, but he said nothing. "Second," Kane continued, "you broadcast a formal order to every Alliance sector to cease hostile actions against free systems and all human territories. The message will be recorded. It will be public. That is non-negotiable." Kane cut in, his tone flat as forged steel. "You're not in a position to haggle, Admiral. You lost your flagship. You've lost half your grip on the galaxy in the past 15 minutes. Do you really want to gamble the rest?" For a moment, only the hiss of the comm link filled the silence. Then Call's shoulders slumped, just barely, and he gave a short nod. "And in return," Kane said, "you get to leave here alive. You'll keep your remaining ships, those that survive the trip home. You'll have time to decide if you'd rather lick your wounds or start digging your own grave." The alien's gaze locked with Kane's, and for the first time, there was something there other than contempt. It might have been respect. Or maybe it was just the recognition that the rules had changed forever. "You have your terms," Call said finally. "We will withdraw." The channel cut. A ripple of exhalation swept the bridge, tension bleeding off in a way that felt almost dizzying. Holt's voice came from the core chamber, ragged but elated. "Crownbreaker's gone. The Alliance is pulling back. Commodore, I think we just made history." "History's never this easy," Kane murmured, but his eyes stayed locked on the viewport. Outside, the crimson lights of the enemy fleet began to arc away, their formations unraveling like a torn net. The retreat was disciplined, but there was no mistaking the truth. They were running. The guy's voice was almost cheerful. "Void Alliance withdrawal in progress. Estimated full clearance of Sol system 5 hours, 22 minutes. Sera stepped up beside Kane, her usual reserve giving way to something that looked almost like satisfaction. "It's done. They'll remember this day for centuries." "Not just them," Kane said. He turned to the comms officer. "Open a channel to all Allied ships. Patch in every free system's frequency you can reach. When the connection stabilized, Kane straightened, his voice carrying across the void to dozens of systems. To all free peoples, today, Terra stands unbroken, and we stand with you. From this moment forward, the Void Alliance does not decide your fate, you do. Together, we form the Galactic Free Alliance. Vel's voice joined his from her own distant bridge, the words sharp and certain. This is the birth of a new order. No more prey, no more chains. The tactical display shifted to a galactic map, now lit with green icons where rebel forces had seized their systems. The tide had turned in hours, but the implications were seismic. The bridge crew began to move again, reports filed, systems powered down, damage assessed. The hum of the pulse cannon faded into a low, satisfied purr. Kane let himself breathe, just once, as the adrenaline began to ebb. That's when Sera's console chimed. She frowned, fingers sweeping through the incoming data. Commodore, I'm picking up a signal. Low frequency, heavily encrypted, origins outside the system, but it's piggybacking on the Alliance retreat vectors. Kane's expression sharpened. Alliance backup force. Sera shook her head slowly. No, the encryption key doesn't match any Alliance signatures. This is older. She adjusted the filter, and a faint, alien cadence filled the bridge, a pulse of sound, deep and resonant, repeating in a pattern no one recognized. Holt's voice came back over comms. And easy now, sir. Whatever that is, it's not running from us. It's coming toward us. For a long moment, Kane said nothing, his gaze fixed on the rhythm of that alien heartbeat echoing through the speakers. Around him, the crew exchanged wary glances, the euphoria of victory already beginning to fade into something colder. He finally turned to Sera, his voice low and certain. Send the recording to Vel, and keep listening. Do you think it's hostile? She asked. Kane's eyes went back to the viewport, where the last Alliance ships were fading into distant points of light. If it isn't, he said, it will be. He let the words hang for a beat, feeling the weight of them settle over the bridge. Then, almost to himself, he added, this war was just the opening act. This war was just the opening act. But what do you think is coming next? Tell me your theory in the comments.